Welcome back to Ivy Unleashed. We are so excited, giddy. We have so much to talk about today, and we have a returning guest, one of the best guests we've ever had, Hailey Magee. Welcome back to Ivy Unleashed.
Hi, guys. Thanks for having me back. I'm stoked.
You know what's so funny is we ended our last episode with you, episode 144, that has done so well. And Brooke said to you, you let us know when you write your book. We will have you back on and talk about it because you were sharing so much gold. And here it is. You did it. Congratulations. We have Stop People Pleasing and Find Your Power. Congrats.
How does it feel to be a published author? I gotta know.
I gotta say, it's pretty surreal. There are those moments I remember when they delivered me my box of books. You know, you do the unboxing and I picked one up and I smelled it. And I remembered all the times I've walked through bookstores, just taking in those fresh books. And it's been awesome. It's been it's been wonderful.
Hailey, you did such a wonderful job. I just got to talk about this book. I mean, we're going to talk about the book the whole time, but I really feel like this book is for everyone. I don't identify as a people pleaser, but reading it through, I feel like it is such a guide for any human being for your mental health, for starting to finish, really walking through the basics of how to understand your needs, understand yourself. And it's something Brooke and I talk about so much, of chasing your dreams and going after what you want. But if you don't know what those things are, and we're going to get into this so much, but I just want people to know that you take people through finding yourself, then standing up for yourself, caring for yourself, and enriching yourself. It is such a thorough guide to living a full, abundant life that's full of authenticity, so you can be you and then have this big life. So thank you for the way you wrote this book. It is such a great read, and it's going to help the masses. I just know it. It probably already is.
I so appreciate that. It's cool too, because I think when people hear that language of people pleasing, that tends to come up in our relationships with other people, right? I put other people first. I can't say no. But really, so many people pleasers struggle with a disconnected relationship from the self. And that's the foundation of so much of this behavior. And so that's why it felt really important to start the book by being hey, before we talk about boundaries or standing up for any of that, we have to start with, who are you? Are you able to know what you feel, what you need, what you want? And I think that's where this work begins for so many of us.
Yes.
I love that it's wherever you fall on this spectrum, really, because you could start way back in the beginning, exactly what you're saying of, do you even know what you want, what you don't want, who you are, your values? Or are you okay, I know who I am and I just need the verbiage around it, the stories that you share and the outline of, okay, here's exactly how to word it in a way where you are meeting your own boundaries. You're doing it respectfully. There's just, the depth of this book is amazing. Andrea doesn't identify as a people pleaser. I do. So it's great for me. It's also great for her to have compassion. Right? So whether you're listening and you identify as a people pleaser or not, to improve your relationship, I think there's that element as well.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And for listeners too, that if you haven't listened to 144, we're not going to talk too much about the basics of people pleasing because we've covered that in 144. So I just wanted to say, before we get into it, a couple things that we covered in the first one is we discussed kindness versus people pleasing, why we people please, how to get started, how we know it's time to set a boundary. So those are things we covered in depth and a lot of curious questions, Brooke and I. It is such a great episode. So I just want to hit that home. We'll link 144 into this episode. So to get started, kind of an intro, but expanding from where we left off, let's talk about the 4 roots of people pleasing, kind of why we're doing this and how this becomes a thing that we do.
Yeah, so it's a great question, right? Because I know a lot of clients come to me and they'll just be like, why do I do this? Why am I putting other people first? And it's so important to understand the origins for ourselves and sort of why it happens, because that helps us have self-compassion along the journey. So we're not beating ourselves up, right? But ultimately, people pleasing is an outdated coping mechanism that somewhere along the way we learned would keep us safe somehow. And of course, that could mean physically safe in the most extreme cases, right? I learned that by making myself small and deferent and passive, I wouldn't be subject to violence per se. But it's not just physical safety. You know, we also learn that people pleasing or shape shifting could keep us emotionally safe, give us love or attention from preoccupied or distant caregivers. For many of us, it's also a tool for ensuring social safety. Like, I don't know about y'all, but I was bullied a lot in elementary and high school. And so it was a really simple takeaway like, oh, if I shapeshift and if I do what others want from me, I'll belong, which is a core human need. And so ultimately, the behavior stems from somewhere in the past we learned, okay, this is how I stay safe. This is how I get accepted. This is how I'm seen. The problem is what worked really well in the past to keep us safe and seen as we get older and we become adults with agency and voice, this old outdated coping mechanism keeps us small. And it keeps us gravitating over and over again to imbalanced relationships that are all give and no take. And we end up feeling disconnected from ourselves and our voices. So it had a great purpose back then, but in the present, it usually wreaks havoc on our lives or our physical health in some way.
Mm-hmm. It's like what once worked then isn't working now. Mm-hmm. And so let's change it. Let's acknowledge is what I'm hearing you say first, that like, okay, this did serve a purpose. There isn't any shame, any judgment. I did what I had to do to survive. And now that I know better, I can do better.
That's exactly right. That's exactly it. Like, I think about it almost as if my people pleasing is like this old, tired warrior. And she fought for me for so hard for so long, and she did a great job. But now adult Hailey, who has voice and boundaries, gets to kind of step in and say, you can retire now. Like, you did a really great job, and now let's show you a new way. Let's show you that now, as an adult, safety doesn't come from making yourself small and voiceless. It comes from using your voice and establishing firm boundaries that keep you well.
Yeah. I love too that you have experience with this, that you lived through these awkward moments of like, this feels like this is not me at all, but I'm going to speak up and like I'm stuck at a bar talking to someone about their life story that I really want to be listening to the music over here. And so I need to like say something. Or I love your examples of, people that are dating and they've been kissing a certain way and she doesn't like it, but she needs to say something and it's going to be awkward. And so your stories, I love that you wove those in because one, it's interesting to hear how other people struggle with speaking up for themselves. But two, it's like a language of how could I say this? There might be a little friction or awkwardness, but then we get through it. And so I would love for you to talk about that process of like easing into speaking up for yourself and maybe what that friction could look like and how to kind of deal with how uncomfortable it can be to like finally set that boundary or say what you actually have for a need or a want.
Yeah, there's no way around it. That's the thing. I think when I went on my book tour, actually, similarly, the most common feedback I got from folks was like, thank you so much for including these stories in the book. And thank you for including that the stories had awkwardness as part of them. Right? Every story of someone setting a boundary, speaking up, advocating for themselves, I go into like whether they felt fear, guilt, self-doubt, awkwardness. Like this is part and parcel of the entire experience. And I think it really helps people to understand that. Because if you're going to start self-advocating and the expectation you have for yourself is, I can only do this when I feel 100% fearless, you're never going to do it. Mm-hmm. Because we need to learn through experience that we can get through the growing pains, I call them, of self-advocacy, and you come out the other side. You might be a little bruised from some of the awkwardness, but you did it. And you get that rush of, oh, I can trust myself to stand up for myself, and that's worth it. So I'd say really, going into this process, one of the biggest things that folks will come in, a lot of folks will say, I don't know how to set a boundary. And sometimes that's true, but what I find more often is what they really mean is, I don't know how to develop the emotional resilience to get through the discomfort of what I know I need to do, right? Whether that's I'm going to upset a family member because I can't come to the annual Christmas gathering, or I'm going to upset a friend because I need to set some limits around how long we process the same issue over and over again. Right? These are really hard conversations to have, especially if we're used to showing up in our relationships as the accommodating one or the passive one, or our sense of identity has been formed around I give, and I give, and I give, and I give, right? So really, in the book, I give a lot of sort of concrete tools and exercises for kind of soothing and reframing through guilt. But one of the simplest and easiest tools I use for folks, especially when clients come to me and we're in a session and they're processing their very valid fears around setting boundaries, is I don't try to talk them out of their fear. I don't try to say, no, Bob, like you'll set this boundary and everything will be just as good and easy as before, because that's just not true. Especially if we've been in imbalanced relationships, there is usually an adjustment period where people push back or people have questions. But what I say is, okay, so there might be fear and you might feel some guilt, but what is it? What would make that fear and guilt worth it? What's on the other side that makes getting through this hard moment worthwhile? And identifying that North Star often provides enough motivation and values alignment to do the hard thing. And one more thing I'll say on that, just because I think it's really crucial. Sometimes our North Star has to do with us, right? Like I want to feel self-respecting. Like I want to have more balance and burn out less and just have more vitality in my life, which is, a beautiful outcome. However, what many of us forget is that setting boundaries is often in service of our relationships, because our boundaries enable them to be sustainable and last over time. And we can talk about this more, but I just like to say sometimes for folks, the North Star is like, hey, I'm setting this boundary with my sibling or my friend so that our relationship lasts in the long term. And that's an admirable goal.
Yeah. And I think that makes it worth it. If you're doing this so that you can have the relationship, because it's not fair to them. I think that's where anger and resentment come when you suppress. And then all of a sudden, you're going to blow up. You can't keep it all in. So when those feelings come up of awkwardness, or, you have that North Star, you know why you're doing it, but the feeling is so uncomfortable. What do you say to those people to stay in that discomfort and to not give in?
Yeah, there are so many different things that are sort of like, in the toolbox of what we can do with that guilt. I'd say the first one, to kind of provide a mental framework for that discomfort, is again, really getting connected to your deepest why. Like, what is the big picture reason for why I'm about to do this uncomfortable thing? What that does is it helps us see past this present acute moment of discomfort for a longer term intention. So we kind of just talked about that with the North Star. Another really crucial tool, it's a little bit of negative motivation, so it can be a little freaky, is you do a little bit of a visioning where you say, okay, let's imagine I'm uncomfortable. What if I give in to this discomfort and I listen and I decide, okay, I'll never set the boundary. I'll never speak up. And I often encourage clients, now imagine your life in 6 months. You never set the boundary. What does it look and feel like then? Now imagine a year. Now imagine 2 years. And as time unfolds, what that exercise helps you sort of fundamentally and viscerally feel into is that sometimes the pains of change are less bad than the pains of staying the same. And we often forget to think about what the pains of staying the same would be when we're feeling so uncomfortable. So those are some sort of like cognitive reframes we can do. We can also think about, okay, how might this benefit the relationship in the long term? How is this an act of love? And that may not change our sort of emotional and physiological experience right now that, hey, my heart's racing, I'm uncomfortable, I'm nervous. And so for that side of things, I often encourage clients to practice really fundamental nervous system regulation skills to tend to the present moment discomfort, whether that's practicing deep breathing, going for a run, or like expelling that energy from the body in some way, having a conversation with a supportive friend just to talk it out and get that encouragement. So I encourage folks to combine the sort of mental reframing with the physical self-soothing. And those two things together offer a pretty powerful foundation for that.
Yeah, the amount of tools in this book, I mean, honestly, I feel like it's step by step of different things you can do, different ways. Like this might not work for you, so this might work for you, or this combination together. I feel like it's one of those books you keep on the shelf and you circle back to, okay, what did she say? How could I do this? What's the graph where I put my values in? And I think that's super important when you're thinking about understanding yourself, right? Why do I keep hitting the same roadblock or the same cycle with the same person? Like, what is this meaning for me? And what I really like that you talked about and gave a lot of examples for are your values, figuring out what your values are and how that plays into decision making. Because I think a lot of times, like the people pleasing friends I have in my life, they tend to also really struggle with decision making. And I think you do such a great job in your book of really helping you make decisions. Like, am I going to the family reunion or am I not? So can you talk about how important our values are when it comes to people pleasing, setting boundaries, and how to care for your mental health?
Yes. I know I'm not supposed to pick favorites as like the parent of this book, but the values chapter was totally my favorite to write because values are amazing. Like for the recovering people pleaser, they're the best tool out there because people pleasers tend to be externally focused and externally motivated, right? So we look to other people, we look to the outside world to tell us how to act and what to do. Values are completely internal and they are intrinsically motivated, which is amazing when we're trying to ask, like, if I put myself first, what would I do here? A lot of recovering people pleasers I work with are hoping to start adopting values like for listeners who are like, what do they mean by values? Things like, honesty, integrity, authenticity, balance, conviction, confidence. All of these values can serve as anchors. And I think it comes up, it's kind of like the conversation we just had about discomfort. I often encourage my clients to make decisions about boundary setting based on their values instead of their discomfort, right? Because our feelings are ephemeral. They change every day based on the season, how we're feeling that day, how much sleep we got. They can be unreliable compass points for making decisions that are in alignment with our long-term well-being. Like if I'm about to set a boundary with my parent, from a feeling perspective, I probably feel uncomfortable, afraid, nervous. So if I were to make my decision based on those feelings, I would probably be like, heck no, I'm not setting this boundary. Like, see you tomorrow. But if I make that decision based on my values, such as, authenticity, integrity, and even compassion, that's going to point me in a different direction. And it's a direction that brings me home to me. And in the book, there's all these tools for what do you do in a situation when one value pulls you one direction and another value pulls you another, right? Because we contain multitudes and knowing how to navigate that is important. But yeah, values are great anchors to stay in ourselves and they're great soothing tools where let's say we set a boundary and the conversation actually goes kind of badly and we're feeling sad about that. We can use them as a self-soothing tool and say, all right, this may have played out in this way, but at least I can trust deep down that I showed up as the type of person I want to be in the world.
So beautiful.
So good, Hailey. So good.
Oh, yeah. And
I love values, you guys.
We do too. I mean, we have an episode on all about purpose and using that list or writing down your list of 20 values that come to mind of what you want to embody and then creating your daily habits based off them too. Mm-hmm. Am I embodying these things? So maybe not in relationships, but yoga, like spirituality. What does that mean for me? It means I'm going to church. It means I'm reading my Bible. It means and am I living it? And so the value list is it's great for so many reasons.
Do you think values can change over time?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think our values, so they tend to be reasonably consistent. And a lot of us get them from our experiences growing up, right? Our culture, our family of origin, our faith, whatever. But then this can happen is when you experience some sort of turning point in life that can often radically reshape our values. Things like, losses, tragedies, having kids, disaffiliating from or joining a faith, or, being in therapy and learning about your tendency to people please. Anything that radically shifts the meaning we make of ourselves in the world can shift our values. And this happens a lot for recovering people pleasers. I experience a lot of folks who are leaving a marriage or are leaving a faith or have moved across the country. And they have this really interesting reckoning where they're like, oh man, for the first 30, 40, 50 years of my life, I valued things like harmony, security, fitting in, being liked. And all of a sudden I'm starting to feel this bubbling. and I'm being called toward courage and creativity and community, whatever. And so it can be really uncomfortable when folks start experiencing those values dissonances, because it can be like, whoa, like, who am I? What's going on? But really what's happening is that your insides are shifting and they're kind of demanding new outsides to match. So it's an evolution, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think knowing that kind of takes the pressure off, at least for me. Like when Andrea was talking about our episode on purpose, I'm like, years later, would that list still be the same for me? Which I think begs the argument of like maybe rewrite that list every year, or knowing your values and understanding when they shift so that you can honor that. I think a lot of people listening are like, I don't know, because I don't take the time to write that list or to think about it. But what you're saying, Hailey, is that list dictates everything and has the ability to calm you. Like I think everyone listening, I don't know, but the term self-soothing, I'm like, ooh, that feels good in today's world. If we all could just snap our fingers, go to a list, have that, and be able to self-soothe based on a list we created to come back home to ourselves, like, whoo, how powerful is that?
And if we all did it, you know, how would our friendships be, our marriages be, our relationships with our parents of, hey, I did this exercise. Like, this is actually, these are some of my values. If you catch me setting some boundaries anytime soon, it's because I'm kind of rediscovering myself, or I feel like I'm in a new chapter, and making it exciting that we can grow and change. And I feel like I'm in the season of loving that I'm a different person and embracing it. What does that look like for me now? You know, I am more of a homebody than I was 5 years ago, or, you know, and like just small things tend to, like, smaller moments are bigger than these big extravagant events coming up, right? And like these little moments at home are so important. What do I want, like, the value of this space to be? And so I just want to make this exciting. Like, it doesn't have to be like a daunting task. This can really enrich your relationships.
Oh, heck yeah. I love the way you guys are like kind of boiling it down and being like, here's how you can use it in your daily life. I love the idea of having a list, updating it regularly. And yeah, like you were saying, like, it doesn't need to be this big, intimidating thing. Like, sometimes I'll encourage folks, just pick one. You know, pick one key value that's really tugging at your insides right now that you really wish to embody, and use it, you know, in any sort of fork in the road moment, right? You're making a tough decision. You're trying to decide whether to have a conversation or not, how to have it. You can just ask yourself, like, if I were to fully embody this value in this interaction, what would I do? What would that look like? And just playing out that mental movie can create this awesome roadmap that will help you feel more connected to yourself.
Can you give an example of maybe one that you've done or a client?
Oh my goodness, yeah. Like I have a timely example. Like just this past weekend, I was having a conversation with a friend, and we were sort of noticing that we are having this dissonance, this resentment, frustration with another friend. And it was this really interesting conversation about, should we talk about this dissonance? Is this something we should discuss as friends and be open and authentic about? Or should we try to just shove it down and pretend we're not bothered and keep going? And the value we were actually interrogating was love. Like, sort of, what does true love really look like here? And we don't like conflict. We don't want to have an uncomfortable conversation. We're not trying to do it to be holier than thou or to sort, but we really are feeling like if we care about this friendship and want it to continue, the truly loving thing is to tell this person what's coming up for us and give us all an opportunity to collectively repair and mend and move forward. And this is why, like, I mean, this is such a great example of the boundary setting stuff, right? Because a lot of us have this idea that setting boundaries is anti-person. Like, if I set a boundary with Bob, I'm being anti-Bob. But it's really not true. Like, boundaries are the distance at which I can love Bob without resenting him. And that's in service of the relationship. So yeah, I'm using the value. I'm not kidding you. I love values. I'm using them all the time.
I love it. I think that's so great too. And what a great word too, if you really love someone. And what I like that you do in the book too, is you flip it. Like, would you want your partner to be unhappy about something or the way things are going and not tell you and pretending they're fine in the relationship? You know, no, or your friend, or, you know, you want an open, honest relationship. And like you said, it's not comfortable sometimes, but like that's, I think what love is like you're honest and you want it to become more of a loving thing. So I hope you tell me when you're unhappy with something and I'm going to tell you. And I think that's love.
Yeah, I think that flipping the script and kind of seeing things from the other's perspective is a huge tool. Like, because I think people pleasers, we're pretty good at, in a relational context, like we can bring empathy, we can bring care, we can bring compassion, but we're not always that great at bringing honesty, transparency, authenticity. And anyone who wants a healthy relationship would absolutely say, I want those qualities. These are green flag qualities that I want in my person. And I think this is one of those kind of rough awakenings that many people pleasers kind of work through is, oh, maybe this people pleasing behavior isn't truly about pleasing others. Maybe it's not really about making others happy or doing what's best for other people. Maybe it's about me making sure I'm liked or approved of as often as possible. Right? Because like we're saying, it is actually in service of others to be honest with them a lot of the time, but we're afraid of that. We're afraid of conflict. And that can be a tough awakening, but a really valuable one. Because if you truly care about doing right by other people, it can provide like positive motivation to start speaking up and being honest.
Yeah. It's a reframe is what I'm hearing you say. Yeah.
100%.
You also talk about how people pleasing is an outdated form of control, which I'd love to get into because I feel like as humans, we love to control. So will you dive into that?
Oh, yeah. That's another rough awakening, I'd say, for a lot of us, right? Because, there's a whole chapter on control in the book. And, whether we're trying to, control other people's emotions or control other people's experience of us by not bringing our authenticity to the table, or, control other people's healing journeys or recovery stories or whatever it is. Like, again, yeah, control is kind of how we learn to stay safe. But what that means is that we're often not letting other people have their own natural journey unfolding. And it can be really scary to take our hands off the reins and say, all right, I'm going to let this happen and let it, allow this person their autonomy.
Yeah. I keep thinking of the phrase, like, I'm going to keep the peace. I'm going to keep the peace, right? I'm just going to tiptoe around this and hopefully there's no issues. There's nothing because I'm going to just keep the peace is what I keep thinking. And so can you give an example of kind of a way that people manipulate a situation by people pleasing to maybe keep the peace? And like you said, they're not showing their authentic self. Like, how do people do this and how is it kind of manipulative rather than kindness?
Yeah, completely. So one caveat I always like to offer, like a nuance, is that obviously, like if someone is in an actively like toxic or abusive situation, it makes sense to keep the peace because your first priority always has to be safety. Right. So I always like to say in a unhealthy or unsafe situation, that makes sense. However, like we said earlier, right, a lot of us carry over this outdated coping mechanism into healthy relationships and into relationships where it would actually make more sense to speak up. So yeah, gosh, an example might be something as simple as, maybe you have a partner, maybe you have a spouse and they are constantly, they're not doing the inner work. And you notice that they have a lot of issues, whether it's everything from like addiction to emotional issues, unwillingness to process something, whatever. And that makes you uncomfortable, right? Probably because in that relationship, for whatever reason, your needs are consistently going unmet. And that's painful. I think many listeners will probably be like, oh yeah, I've been there with family, with partners, with siblings. Now, here's where control comes out, right? Because we can make requests of other people. Of course, we can and should, express our feelings, express our needs, say like, hey, my needs are going unmet. And so would you please work on this? And that's really valuable work for the recovering people pleaser. But the problem happens when you go through that cycle over and over again, and the other person is unable or unwilling to meet you where you need to be met. And this is where the recovering people pleaser tends to double down on control efforts, because either we try to control them to get the outcome we want, or, and this is what most of us are avoiding, in our attempts to control. We have to reckon with the grief and the powerlessness that comes from the revelation that this does not work for me. They cannot meet me where I need to be met. And there's true grief in that, because that then means if I truly accept that reality is real, I then have to set boundaries or create some sort of distance or space or end this relationship. And many of us are really, really scared of the severance of that connection, right? So ultimately, if you're listening and you're like, I do notice like a controlling tendency in my life, it can be worth looking under that tendency and asking yourself, how is this controlling pattern preventing me from feeling grief or from feeling sadness about the true nature of what's present right now? And that's, I'm not going to lie, it's not fun, but it is honest and real. And if we keep trying to control, we're going to feel consistently unempowered. We're going to feel resentful. We're going to feel really disconnected from our agency. But owning what is in our control and allowing that grief is the only path that helps us feel like we have choices.
Yeah. Wow. Beautifully said. And I think that's a part of life, is sometimes you do have to end a relationship. Sometimes, I think a way to kind of wait it out of like, am I done with this cycle or am I going to do something about it, is like, how much time are you wasting of your precious life in the same toxic cycle with whoever, saying the same things 15 different ways and getting the same result? I feel like, you're just, whoever's listening right now, your time is so valuable, and you deserve to have relationships with people that help you honor yourself and your requests. And if they're consistently not, what are we doing here? Like, you are so much more valuable than that. And I think a lot of it has to do with self-worth and understanding you deserve this time to know yourself, to take this book that Hailey has written and truly understand yourself. And so how do you help people place that value on themselves to take this time to speak up for themselves and have that self-worth to even start doing this work?
Good question.
Yeah, that is a good question. And for so many, I think that is really this root phenomenon, right? Is like, it's gonna be tough to do that if we're not coming at this from a place of value, of self esteem, right? And something I like to emphasize is that this work is it is a practice. It's not something, you read a book about and you're suddenly enlightened and you go out and you're like queen boundary setter right away. And if someone listening has done that, please call me, because I want to pry you for information and learn how you did that. But the reason I like to emphasize that it is a practice is that it implies that there is this consistent, diligent, daily effort that we kind of have to put into honoring ourselves. And it is a little bit of a chicken and an egg, right? Because if I value myself, then I speak up and advocate for myself. And then I get that rush of self-esteem or self-trust that comes from, hey, look at me. I can trust myself to speak up when I need it. And then that further enhances the self-connection and the self-esteem. So it is cyclical. And something I say in the book that I think really speaks to this is that, often we are under the false impression that we have to feel a certain way before we act a certain way. So I'm going to wait to speak up until I feel super confident and grounded in myself and ready to go. And only then will I pursue my passion or speak up. That's really limiting, because a lot of us aren't going to suddenly just feel fully confident. We don't want to feel our way into a new way of acting. We want to act our way into a new way of feeling. In other words, take the actions that would then allow us to develop self-esteem. Because then we have evidence, right? And it feels really good. So, of course, that can feel really intimidating when you're coming into this work from a place of low self-confidence. And you're like, oh my God, like I can't set that huge boundary with my boss, or I can't, and that's okay. Start small. I really say like chunk it down and consider these 1 out of 10 intensity action steps that you could take that would show yourself that esteem, whether it's, carving out 10 minutes to actually take a break in the middle of the workday. So you teach yourself like, I'm worthy of rest, or, turning down that invitation to the party that you really don't want to go to because it's past your bedtime on a Friday and you go to bed at 8 o'clock. and I'm speaking from personal experience.
I love that for you.
Total grandma move. I love that for me too. It's so good. But like, yeah, I would say what you'll find, and I do this with clients a lot, is kind of chunking down these things into small, actionable steps that over time will help you build self-esteem and make setting those harder boundaries easier.
Yeah. I'm thinking from personal experience, like around time, right? As an entrepreneur and doing what feels like a million things, I'm like, okay, I have the excuses. I don't have kids. And so I'm like, yep, I can do this. My time, right? It feels more flexible than, say, if I had kids. Well, then I got to the point where I'm like, I have no time for just me. And why do I need to have kids as an excuse to have time for me? All right. So I'm like, okay, what would the ideal schedule look like? Okay, I'm not working past a certain time. I'm not working before a certain time. I'm not working on the weekends. And I literally made a list in my notes app on my phone. And I'm like, okay, step 1, you don't work before 9 a.m. Step 2, you don't work on the weekends. And then I thought, okay, what boundaries do I need to put in place? Okay, I need to have a conversation with this person. And I have this list of like, here are my time boundaries. And as I check them off, I could keep coming. I keep looking at that. And then I have it somewhere where I see, so that if something comes up, I'm like, okay, is it worth, like, does this really excite me? Is this an F yes? And if not, then I am honoring my own boundary, my own love, my own, whatever value is present. But it had to be a practice, and I had to chunk it down. So like to show people how granular I got, and it was really uncomfortable, and it still is really freaking uncomfortable. But when something comes up and I'm like, oh, I said no to that, like it feels really good. I think the practice of it, and the time comes up and I'm like, wow, I'm really glad I didn't say yes to that. That's when I feel it, of like, come the Saturday and I'm like, ooh, I can do this now because I said no to that, and this fills me up way more. And now I feel refreshed. So I just felt the need to give a little example of how I'm kind of implementing this. When you say chunk it up, I'm like, yes.
Yes. Oh my God. I'm so pro Notes app tracking these little boundary victories. And to double down on what you said too, like, I love this example. And you could also have a piece in your Notes app. A lot of my clients do this, where they actually document like all the little micro wins, the things they said no to, the time they said to their massage therapist, like, hey, the pressure's a little too hard. Can we have less? Like, every little win where you feel like you're advocating for yourself. If you document that in your Notes app and then you look at it a month from now, your self-esteem will 100% be enhanced, because you can forget those micro moments. But when you see them all in a list, you're like, oh my God, I would have never done this 6 months ago. Look at me go. So it's huge.
Yeah. I love that. Having the proof, the evidence. Because you grow a lot, and we don't give ourselves credit. I'm like, damn, the me 3 years ago would be so proud. But until you actually pause and have some sort of evidence or time for reflection, we don't think like that. And I think it's so important. We're doing hard work. We need to reward ourselves, damn it.
When you're saying this and you're talking through this, it's making me think of page 36. And I want to read this quick from Hailey's book, because it's just, woo, it is so good. So Hailey said, research shows that those who practice healthy selfishness, who have a healthy respect for their own needs, health, and happiness, report more positive relationships and more loving attitudes towards others. When we're depleted, we are distractible, frustrated, and fatigued. It's hard to be It's hard to be a caring and attentive companion when we're chronically on the brink of collapse.
Amen. Say it louder for the people in the back.
So many people, especially women, our listeners, are on the brink of collapse. Of course you're resentful and you're short and you're impatient. And then we beat ourselves up because we're freaking out on our kids, or we're tired and we take it out on our loved ones, right? And we're like, oh, why am I doing this? And it's like, because you're not standing up for yourself. And you can't stand up for yourself if you don't know who you are and what you need. And so it just circles back to why this book needed to be birthed into the universe. And I'm so happy you wrote it. And I want you to tell everybody where they can get it, how they can follow you, so that they can take all the steps you put in this book for them into their life.
Thanks, guys. Yeah. So, I mean, the book is, major booksellers, Barnes and Noble, Amazon, whatever, go over there, or you could go to HaileyMagee.com/book. And yeah, it's such a great guide that kind of walks you through all the foundational stages, really, of breaking the pattern. So go snag it.
Yes.
Okay, next up, you know the drill. You've been here before. Your 3 gold stars, top 3 takeaways you want to leave listeners with.
Oh boy. Okay. So I would say, first of all, you build self-compassion by understanding the origins of how your people-pleasing kept you physically, emotionally, or socially safe in the past. So do some digging in there, and the book can help you with that. That's the first one. The second one would be remembering that ultimately, even though boundary setting in the moment can feel against the person you're setting a boundary with, on the whole, it is really pro relationship because, boundaries are the distance at which we can love someone without resenting them. That's huge. And then 3 would just be, if you are a people pleaser who tends to be very externally motivated and externally focused, a really great portal home to the self can be identifying your top values and choosing to make actions every day that align with them.
Beautiful.
So good.
Hailey,
This is the fastest hour of my life, Hailey. I feel like I could just keep talking to you.
I really hate that we're wrapping this up.
But we're not, because we've got some more questions.
That's right. We're not done yet. Okay, good. All right, next up is Unleashing Ivy. So surprise questions that we're intrigued about. We just want some more juicy details from you.
I can go first.
Mine's real juicy. Yeah, you go first.
Okay. What is the best boundary you've ever set?
Ooh.
God. Yeah, I mean, so basically, I would say the most meaningful, the best one, the one that has most improved my life was maybe 6 or 7 years ago. There had been some dynamics in my family that had not been working for me for a while. And I was kind of the oldest daughter. So there's all these memes going around these days about like eldest daughter, and you end up being like the caretaker and the listener and the therapist in your family. But I'd been in therapy for a while, and I started to see how some of those things weren't working for me and were kind of, not working for the family. And my mom had planned us all a family trip to Hawaii, and we were supposed to go on that. And leading up to this trip, I was just like, I can't go on this trip. There's too much that's unspoken. There's too many elephants in the room. And it was the most intense thing I'd ever done because I told her I could not go, which was terrifying. But it offered a really great opportunity. It opened the door for me to express for the first time to my parents some of the dynamics I was seeing and the role I was no longer willing to play. No longer willing to pretend that everything was okay and no longer willing to brush things under the rug. And that was by far like the hardest boundary I've ever had to set because it risked throwing my whole family into disarray. And the truth is it did for a while. I like to include this part because it's real. My parents were a little bit hurt by some of what I said. There was a lot of tension and discomfort as we had these conversations about it. But I can say it was absolutely the best thing because it allowed these invisible dynamics to be brought into the open. And as the result, a lot of healing happened in my family over time. And now when I interact with my parents, when I think to myself, if they were to die tomorrow, would there be anything left unsaid or any inauthenticity that was present? The answer would be no. And I have to give them props because they both handled it so beautifully and gracefully, which is, not something every adult child gets to experience from their parents. But that was the biggie.
Thank you for sharing that with us. Wow.
Yeah, and a lot of oldest daughters too listening, it's good to hear an example of, how it can turn in, eventually it will be a really beautiful dynamic, because that is hard. I can just picture so many of my girlfriends that are oldest that are keeping the peace or, they play all those roles that can be really exhausting to play. And then once you're tired of them, doing something about it. So I'm so proud of you. That had been really hard.
Past me is thank you so much. It was so scary. It was scary.
We did it.
Right. Yeah. In retrospect, you can really see it's it's worth it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. This question has nothing to do with that and is a very hard left turn.
Oh, I know where this is going.
And it's so juicy. It's so good. So I did not see this coming. I didn't know there would be chapters about sex. And I'm here for it because you talked about consensual but unwanted sex. And I think this, when it comes to people pleasing or even people that don't identify as a people pleaser, I feel like anybody could feel oh, I've totally done this before. I've had sex when I didn't really want to, or I was trying to help out my relationship, or I feel like it's been too long, so I should do this thing. And I would love for you to talk about how consensual but unwanted sex kind of plays into people pleasing and how people can kind of help benefit the relationship by bringing this to the surface.
Yeah, this is like a pet topic that is so important to me because it's something I've experienced a lot firsthand, and I've heard a lot from people kind of whispered, because folk, talking about sex is uncomfortable. And I think the truth is, the majority of people I know have experienced consensual unwanted sex. So yeah, it's like you're giving consent, everything about like your body language, and you are consenting, maybe even enthusiastically, but deep down inside, you're not really wanting it. Everything from like, I don't really want this to like, I really don't want this. And ultimately, it's a complicated issue because we're not taught to imagine that like sex can be traumatizing without like a perpetrator, right? But it's really hard because in those moments, we are the ones overriding our own boundaries to engage physically with another person. And the truth is, for people, this can actually be traumatizing. For some people, you have an experience like that and you're just like, didn't love that, but whatever, it's over, I'm fine. And then for others, you can have like a visceral sense of like unsafety in your body or panic attacks or other sort of symptoms of trauma. And so, it factors into people pleasing because it's that classic example of presenting one exterior while feeling a different way inside, right? And it's especially hard when we're in like, partnership or marriage or other relationships where we do feel like there are these unspoken expectations about sex and sexuality. And we don't know how it would go if we were to say, I'm not in the mood, or I'm not in the mood this month, this year. I don't want to. But ultimately, I think this is one of the key ways that a lot of people pleasers can reclaim their agency, because it really fundamentally means like reestablishing self-trust with your physical body. Mm-hmm. Like, you can trust me that I will not put you in situations you don't want to experience. And in the book, I offer a couple different tools for this. But one of the biggest ones I'd say when it comes to consensual unwanted sex is flipping the script. What I mean by that is like I interviewed some folks for the book who had been on the receiving end of other people's sexual people pleasing. What I mean by that is they found out months later from a partner or a person they'd been dating, hey, I know we slept together, but I didn't really want it. Or, hey, I know that it seemed like I was really enjoying myself in the bedroom, but the truth is that wasn't real. And the degree of like betrayal, frankly, or humiliation or disconnection that can come up as the result of receiving others' sexual dishonesty it's really legit. You know what I mean? And so I think really, again, it's in service of the relationship to communicate the hard truth or to say you're not interested in an encounter. But yeah, it's pervasive. Like most people I've spoken with have experienced this somehow.
Totally. Speak your truth, people, in and out of the bedroom.
Yeah. Well, and I'm just so happy that I don't know if it was uncomfortable for you to talk about this on a podcast or in your book and like bring this to light, but I feel like it's something, like you said, it's a really quiet thing. Not everybody talks about it, and it's going to enhance a relationship and true, genuine authenticity and intimacy in a relationship. And it's not an easy thing to talk about. And in the book too, you go way in depth of like maybe why we feel like we need to do this. So there's no shame that maybe you've faked something before. There's reasons we do it, right? And so I just want to thank you for writing this chapter because it was really juicy and fun to read. And just like with every other chapter, the tools, the ways to communicate, the stories that are weaved in make it so like it gives us language in kind of an uncomfortable topic to talk about. So thank you for doing that.
Yeah. Oh, it was my pleasure. Thanks for reading it.
So last time you were on, Hailey, we asked you, if you could go back to your previous, like old self and tell yourself something, what would you say? So instead, we're going to kind of flip it and thinking about your future self, future Hailey. What are you kind of hoping she embodies, does, that she brings to light or surfaces or becomes that you want to eventually thank her for? You're on your deathbed and you think back like, and you're so happy that like Hailey did this for yourself.
You guys trying to make me cry?
Yeah, that gave me chills too.
Yeah, gosh, it's so visceral for me. Oh, man. I think Yeah. Okay. My answer is this. I think like I'm 31 and like I think I spent my 20s, kind of doing a lot of typical things we learn to do in our 20s. Like I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a coach. There was all this emphasis on like climbing the ladder and hitting these milestones and kind of like, working hard and all of this. And that was really valuable and I'm grateful for that. But I think at this moment, I've had a couple experiences over the past couple of years that have shifted my values. And I'm really feeling called toward a little bit less of that like individualistic hustle and a lot more like community and really deeply embodying like the ethic of love, like we were talking about, like in relationships and in my work and in my stuff. So I don't know. I guess what I would really want future Hailey to feel is that she had found a way to bring like community and lovingness into as many of her endeavors as possible, which I know sounds kind of vague, but it's coming from the heart. It just hits right here. So
It's beautiful.
I love that.
Wow. I don't want you to go, Hailey. I just like watching you on social, reading your book. I'm so honored you're sitting right here right now. I just want to take in this moment, like the work that you've done from being this young kid that was bullied. It just like breaks our heart, but you have been so brave. And I feel like a lot of people that have been bullied, they stay small, right? And they don't speak up and they don't address their growth. And you've done a lot of work on yourself and you are a living example of how important this work is so that you can live this authentic life and have these rich relationships. So I'm just so honored that we found you and have had you here twice and that our listeners get to hear this because it is life-changing information and tools. And I'm so happy you put it into your beautiful book. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Oh, thank you guys for having me so much. I feel like every time we chat, we could just go levels and levels deeper. The onion has endless layers.
Yes.
Which means you'll be back, which is all I need to hear to be okay. Oh, last but not least, Hailey, we leave our listeners with a piece of gold, a quote that speaks to you. Would you please send us off with yours?
Ooh, yeah. Yeah, I'm thinking of the Prentice Hempel quote, which is just boundaries are the distance at which I can love you and me simultaneously. It's a classic favorite.
This is Gold Ivy signing off.
Listen to your truth and go chase your gold. Oh, I love that quote. Oh, man. This was so good.
Y'all always make me feel so comfortable. It's such a skill and a gift, and I really appreciate it.